Ray Cilli was once the feared Comanchero kingpin, ruling the streets of Perth with an iron fist. But how did a man, once at the top of the criminal world, end up on the run and in custody thousands of miles away? His story is one of betrayal, power struggles, and a life lived in the shadows. As the police close in, the question is, what happens when a criminal mastermind finally faces justice? Stick around, because the shocking downfall of Ray Cilli is about to unfold. Ray Cilli wasn't born into the world of crime, but he sure made it his own. Growing up in the gritty streets of Perth, he quickly learned how to survive. It wasn't long before he found himself entangled with the Notorious Comanchero Motorcycle Club, a gang with a reputation that spread far beyond Australia's borders. Cilli wasn't content with just being a member. He had bigger plans. With his sharp mind and relentless ambition, he clawed his way to the top. By the time he became the state commander of the Comancheros, Cilli was more than just a leader. He was a kingpin. Drugs, violence, extortion. He ran the show, and anyone who crossed him quickly learned that the consequences were severe. But how did a guy from Perth become the head of one of the most feared crime groups in Australia? Well, it wasn't by being soft. It was a combination of brains, brawn, and the willingness to do whatever it took to expand his empire. His operations were smooth, methodical, no room for mistakes. That's how he became the man to watch, the name that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who was anyone in the criminal world. However, Ray Cilli's rise wasn't without its hurdles. He faced competition, rival gangs, and the constant threat of law enforcement. But instead of backing down, Cilli leaned into it. His ability to outmaneuver enemies and stay a step ahead of the cops made him a dangerous player in the underworld. People feared him. They respected him. And for a while, that was enough. But nothing in the world of crime lasts forever. The higher you climb, the harder you fall. The same drive that helped Cilli reach the top would soon become the thing that brought him down. And so, the seeds for his downfall were planted. Although, at the time, no one, not even Cilli himself, could have guessed how it would all play out. The Comancheros thrived under Cilli's leadership, operating across Australia and beyond. But as his influence grew, so did the scrutiny. Law enforcement agencies were starting to take notice, and with power came enemies. Cilli may have been on top of the world, but a storm was brewing. One that would eventually catch up with him in the most unexpected of ways. His grip on power, however, wasn't just about fear, it was about loyalty too. Those in the gang admired him for his ruthless efficiency, but also for his ability to lead by example. His word was law, and when Cilli spoke, people listened. Whether it was dealing with betrayal or orchestrating big criminal deals, he was the one calling the shots. But the higher you rise in the criminal underworld, the more people want to take your place. And that's where things started to get messy for Cilli. At this point, no one could have predicted just how quickly everything would spiral out of control. In the world of crime, everything is about timing, and Cilli's time, it seemed, was about to run out. But let's be real, nothing ever stays quiet for long in the underworld. As Cilli enjoyed his time in the limelight, the law was closing in, and there were whispers of betrayals from within his own ranks. The world of crime has a way of chewing people up and spitting them out when they least expect it. That's where the story of Ray Cilli begins to take a dark turn, and what comes next would set the stage for one of the most shocking downfalls in Australia's criminal history. Everything was going smoothly for Ray Cilli until it wasn't. As his empire grew, so did the number of eyes watching him. Law enforcement wasn't going to let a kingpin like him operate unchecked forever. It wasn't long before the feds began tightening the noose around his neck. But Cilli, ever the mastermind, knew how to slip away from danger. However, the pressure was starting to build. His downfall didn't come from the usual suspects. It wasn't a rival gang member or a botched job. It came from a betrayal. Cilli's empire was massive, and while loyalty within the gang was strong, there were cracks. A few members grew tired of playing second fiddle. Others were trying to climb the same ladder that Cilli had once climbed. Tension simmered behind closed doors, and whispers began to spread. But even as the pressure mounted, Cilli thought he had things under control, until a shocking turn of events put him directly in the sights of both local authorities and international law enforcement. The downfall was set into motion, not by his rivals, but by a web of criminal actions that eventually caught up with him. As the walls closed in, Cilli went into hiding. For years, no one knew where he was. Some thought he'd fled to another country. Others believed he was hiding out in the remote corners of Australia. The Comancheros lost their shine, and without their strong leader, chaos spread through their ranks. With each passing day, the question lingered. Where was Ray Cilli, and what would it take to bring him back into the spotlight? The law had a good idea. They were piecing together the details of his operations, using his network of criminal activities to track his every move. Eventually, Cilli's name started popping up in investigations. The once untouchable kingpin had become the most wanted criminal in the country, and now the hunt was on. But even then, Cilli remained elusive, like a shadow that could slip through any crack in the system. But hiding forever wasn't realistic, and soon, Ray Cilli would discover that not even the best criminal minds can escape justice forever. For years, Ray Cilli managed to stay one step ahead of the law. His life as a fugitive wasn't easy, though. Being the target of both Australian authorities and international crime units meant constant paranoia, and Cilli had to stay hidden in plain sight. The world knew him as a criminal mastermind, but now he was a man on the run. And while he had the resources to keep moving, even the best laid plans fall apart eventually. As the pressure from law enforcement increased, Cilli made a bold decision. He fled the country. Southeast Asia seemed like a good hideout, where law enforcement might not have the same reach. It wasn't long before he settled in a quiet, relatively unknown corner of Thailand. But hiding isn't the same as living, and Cilli wasn't living. He was just existing, waiting for the day his past would catch up with him. But the fact that he wasn't behind bars didn't mean he was safe. As he lived in exile, the world around him was shifting. The Comancheros, his former empire, were falling apart without their leader. Rival gangs saw opportunity, and the police were relentless. Cilli's name remained at the top of their most wanted list, and each passing year saw even more pressure on him to make a mistake. But Cilli was a smart man. He kept his head down, tried to stay off the radar, and avoided unnecessary attention. Yet, no matter how clever the plan, there are always things outside of your control. And soon, something would happen that even Ray Cilli couldn't predict. As we know, no one gets away forever. Cilli's peaceful exile was about to come to an abrupt end, and he was about to find out that running from your past is harder than it seems. Ray Cilli's time in hiding wasn't as glamorous as it might seem. Sure, he had money, resources, and a network of contacts, but it wasn't enough to shield him from the inevitable. Law enforcement was closing in, and Cilli's past was about to catch up with him in the most dramatic way. His arrest came unexpectedly. In a quiet corner of Southeast Asia, where he'd tried to stay under the radar, Cilli was finally apprehended. It wasn't a flashy arrest. No gunfire, no high-speed chases. It was a careful, well-planned operation. But it was the end of his reign as a kingpin, and the beginning of a new chapter, one that would likely end behind bars. His capture was a massive blow to the underworld, and it left the Comancheros in chaos. Without their leader, the gang was falling apart. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Cilli, but for all those who thought they could avoid the long arm of the law forever. For Cilli, the question of his fate was no longer whether he would be caught, but what would happen after. The years of running had taken their toll. His downfall was a combination of bad luck, bad decisions, and the reality that no matter how hard you fight to stay free, you can never escape the past. As authorities closed in, it became clear that Cilli's empire had crumbled, and the price for his criminal career would be steep. In the end, Ray Cilli's downfall wasn't just about the police or rival gangs. It was about the inevitable consequence of living a life of crime. For all the power, respect, and fear that Cilli commanded, there was one thing he couldn't control: time. Time always catches up with you. No one is untouchable forever. Ray Cilli's story is a reminder of how quickly everything can change, how the top of the world can turn into the cold walls of a jail cell in the blink of an eye. His downfall might be shocking to some, but for those who knew the dangerous game he played, it was always just a matter of time. Ray Cilli's name may live on in whispers, but his reign has ended. The kingpin is no longer untouchable, and in the end, the law always finds a way to win.